Hey, I'm JM and I'm your host,
And I'm your co host, Sam. And together we're here to bring you
the
the Solo
Solo
Success
Success Podcast.
Podcast.
So, the reason why we're bringing this to you today is that the hair and beauty industry is moving fast towards a world of freelancers. Over 70% of people working in the space are freelance, and actually 48% of salons are looking to close within the next couple of years. So, there's a big opportunity for those who want to go solo. But what we found is that there wasn't any good resource out there to help you on your journey.
So, on each episode, we'll be speaking to different industry experts and insiders, those that have been on interesting journeys and that have stories to tell. And they're going to be sharing their tips and advice on how you can elevate your solo beauty career.
I'm super excited. That's so awesome. Let's get into it. Hello, welcome, Hayley. Super excited to have you with us. You're the founder of the Resilient Hairdresser, and I'm so excited about this episode today. You were a former hairdresser and former psychotherapist, and you turned hair and beauty coach. And you started, I think, the Resilient Hairdresser because you noticed that there was a lack of education on how hairdresser can look after themselves, which is why actually I think I'm super excited about this discussion because I think this is like actually a very big problem in the industry. I mean, in general in society, but I think in this industry in particular. You specialize in burnout prevention and ADHD management, and you're also an international speaker on mental health in the beauty industry. I mean, I'm very honored. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
So I think where I wanted to start is you've had like an illustrious career, and I would be interested in like kind of what inspired this transition from hairdressing to therapy.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting, really. It wasn't such a pleasant reason, really, in a funny kind of way. I initially had some therapy because I was depressed. And I was struggling, and I had been for a long time. And then eventually in my early 30s, I got a therapist and I saw her for a couple of years. And what I hoped was that when my mental health improved, my love for hairdressing would come back. Because as well as my mental health being a problem, I wasn't enjoying my job. I was overwhelmed. I was burnt out. I didn't think things could be different. But I kind of thought if I felt better, I would feel different. And so it was quite a shock to me that I didn't. You know, when I started to feel better mentally, I still felt the same about my job. And so at that time, I believed nothing could be done.
Mm-hmm.
The industry couldn't change. And so my only option was to leave. I think something quite different now. However, back then I didn't. And so I became really interested in therapy beyond myself because I thought it was brilliant. And I just said to my therapist one day, I want to do what you do. And she said, well, I think you'd make a good therapist. And she told me where you go to train and stuff. And so I applied and they said to me, hairdressers always make good therapists, in you come. And so, you know, the transition in some ways was because I wanted out of the hair industry and I wanted a new career. Because I didn't think I could carry on as I was for another 30 years, which was definitely true, actually. However, you know, in hindsight, you know, what I'm really passionate about teaching now is that there are things that can change. You know, what I say all the time is I hate seeing talented hairdressers leave the industry because they're burnt out and overwhelmed and stressed. I think there are things that can be done about that. But I come across hairdressers who feel like I used to, where they feel that nothing can be done. The hairdressing will never change and the option is to leave. And so I really wanted to do something about that. But yeah, that was the reason that I retrained as a psychotherapist.
That's fascinating. And you said that you wanted to leave because you felt nothing could change. Now you feel differently about that.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a bit more about that?
Yeah, exactly that. And so what I realised through my therapy training was I was missing a lot of things as a hairdresser, boundaries being one, any version of self-care being another. And so I now believe we can change because I changed, because I was a therapist for about 5 or 6 years, but I found it quite a lonely job. And so I decided, I slowly came back into hairdressing as a favour for a friend. Mm-hmm. That's really what happened. My friend begged me, true, would I please come and do them some colour, because I was a colourist and their colourist had left. And I said, you know what, I'll do you a day, because I thought it might offset the loneliness I was feeling as a therapist. And I thought, that's what I'll do. But I started to find that I was happier on the day I was hairdressing with time. And I realised that everything I'd learned as a therapist was serving me really well as a hairdresser. And I was doing things different and I was behaving differently. And because of that, things had changed. And so I didn't feel like I used to. And this is when I really was reflecting on this stuff. And I thought, if I'd have known this stuff, I wouldn't have had to leave. And so I realised I had something new to bring to hairdressers to help them with a side of the industry that I felt nobody was talking about. And like you said earlier, I realised there was a lack of education on this side in, what some people might call soft skills. I mean, I think they're pretty hard, but I think we're being taught to be better, how to take care of clients better, how to cut better, colour better, all of that, how to retail better. But at no point was I hearing anybody say, but to do all of that, you're going to need to look after yourself if you want your career to be happy and long and healthy. And I just thought, I see what the missing piece is, and I've got this weird skill set and I could help. And so I wrote a workshop. That's the first thing that I did. That's how I thought I thought my business would be doing workshops in salons. That was what I thought of at the beginning, but obviously since then it's changed dramatically.
So when did you actually launch the Resilient Hairdresser, and how did that sort of come about? What was the first step of it? Was it that you were going to set up these sort of like masterclasses for salons? How did it?
Yeah, it was an idea in the summer of 2019, and by I think it was about the October, I'd written a workshop, and I was talking to a hairdresser online that I knew who had a salon. I'd never met her, but we got talking, who knows why. And I said to her, do you know, I've written this workshop. I'd like to try it out on a salon that I don't know. I'd already practiced it on friends that were hairdressers, and they were like, yeah, it's great. And I just thought, I need to try it on people who don't know me, who won't say lovely things if it's not. And so I took it to this person's salon, and she was like, this is great. This is really good. And it gave me the confidence to push it out further. And so essentially I think it was like November 2019, I set up my Instagram. And we all know what's coming because this is November 19, remember, folks? And I was like, yeah, I'm just going to go up and down the country and go and do workshops in person. And I thought I was going to serve busy hairdressers. That's what I was planning on doing. I'm serving busy, burnt out, overwhelmed hairdressers. And then and I'm still behind the chair at this point. And then fast forward to March 2020, we got locked down and everything really changed. And hairdressers were not busy anymore and they were stressed for a different reason. And so I had all this stuff prepared that all of a sudden wasn't relevant. And I found myself glued to Instagram like the rest of the hairdressers and the rest of the world, really, taking the temperature of the industry. And, and I was still behind the chair then. So I had the worries that everybody had. And, my income disappeared overnight. I was worried about that. And I just was paying attention to what hairdressers were worried about and trying to solve those problems. And so it's so different to how I work now. But then I was literally every day seeing what people were talking about and then trying to make posts and videos to solve those problems. And then in that time, I started one-to-one coaching because a woman from Australia messaged me and was like, I love what you do. You're never going to come. What have you got for me? And because I was a therapist and I used to sell my time an hour at a time, I just sort of said to her, well, I could talk to you on Zoom, but like we weren't even using Zoom then. I didn't have it. I didn't know how to use it. And I said, why don't we meet on Zoom for 20 minutes, have a chat? And if you think I'm for you, maybe we could just, do it like I used to do therapy. And I'll talk to you for an hour. And within 10 minutes of meeting her, she was like, where do I sign up? You're for me. And that's how I got my first coaching client. And I coached her for a long time and we're still in touch and she's doing great. She's got a salon now. She's doing brilliantly. But I realised it was really needed. And so I started to say, hey, do you want to buy an hour of my time? And so things grew in that way. And so I was really just adapting to a very bizarre time and trying to help hairdressers through a weird time. And lots of stuff came out of lockdown because you know, what was really interesting in that time was, you know, there was some really good things and some really awful things about it in hindsight. But by the time we were going back after the third lockdown, hairdressers were terrified because they knew what was coming. Like going back the first time, not so bad. The second time, it was like wait lists, people hounding you to be first. You know, it was crazy. And by the third one, hairdressers were weary. They were like, I'm too scared to go back to the waiting list and the hassle and the amount of work. And so I then wrote my course, Burnout and Boundaries, which was, it's changed over the years. But initially that was to help hairdressers get some boundaries in and stuff so that they didn't burn out with all those waiting lists that you remember we were dealing with and all that sort of stuff. And so I've really just been reacting to what the industry wants. And that's how things have developed, and that's how it continues to develop. Yeah,
that's amazing. It's really finding a niche in a time when people are kind of don't know
a really weird niche.
Really weird niche, yeah. But
I've got a really weird niche. When I tell people what I do, it's so funny. You know, people who are not in our industry, I usually just say things like, I talk to hairdressers that are stressed, and they say, "Why are hairdressers stressed?" And I think,
you've got no idea.
You've got no idea.
What are some of the main like stresses that you think that people are kind of showcasing today, and like so maybe the first sort of signs that you pick up or can detect when they're kind of leading to burnout?
I think there are a few red flags that burnout is on its way. One of them is joylessness. It's like you're no fun anymore. You're like, you know, I used to think I used to be fun. What happened to me? I start taking myself very seriously, things very seriously. And, you know, if people say, do you want to go out? I feel put upon. You know, I just think, oh, another thing to do. Now I've got to socialise. And I feel like saying to people, don't you know how busy I am? Why are you asking me to go out dancing? You know, and so you just become a total no fun zone and don't recognise yourself in that way. Another thing is feeling resentful. You know, when someone wants to book an appointment with you, you just think, oh, well, why are people mithering me? What in their hair done? You know, stuff like that. And, you know, maybe you feel resentful of friends or family who, I don't know, don't work Saturdays, seem to have more free time than you know, things like that. And I think that just when you have got no time to do anything for yourself and look after yourself, I think that's a really bad sign as well. I think when we're busy, the first things we let go are things that are good for us. Just us. You know, so gym, exercise, first things that goes for a lot of people. Eating reasonably well goes. People start hitting the takeaways quite hard, stuff like that, you know, and then we might start leaning into things to de-stress, like drinking a bit more wine, shopping a bit more for some fun, dopamine, you know, a quick fix of fun. And so we might lean into habits that are maybe not as good for us if we keep doing them. Stuff like that, you know. Yeah.
So when you start doing that, so maybe some people will recognize themselves when they hear you say this. What can you do against that? Obviously contact you, but then, you know, before that, is there anything they can do themselves to to relax a bit?
Before that, follow me on Instagram. But no, it's so, I can explain it in a really simple way. You know, the premise of what you've got to do. But the trouble is that hairdressers, I find it very hard for a few reasons, and so I'll get to that. I write myself a note. But it's the things you've got to do is essentially take some things off your plate. You're going to have to do less somehow and reduce your responsibilities, and people hate being told that. It's the worst thing you can say. They're like, no, what can I do to get out of this? And I'm like, you need to do less. And people are like, yeah, but what can I do? And the trouble is that if you give a busy, burnt out person some more to do, they don't get better, they get more burnt out. Mm-hmm. And so you have got to do less for a while. Recoup some energy, because the trouble is when you're in survival mode, and I think, you know, they're like sisters, survival mode and burnout, similar and different, both, you know. But let's say when you're in survival mode, all you can do is put one foot in front of the other. You lose the capacity to use your imagination. Like, you'll hear people, mental health people say, kids who are stressed don't play. Adults who are stressed don't imagine. They can't imagine. That's what happens. Imagining is like playing. And so what that means is you can't solve problems that are in the future because, well, you can't even think past your next client and what you're going to feed your kids for tea. You just can't think beyond that. And so when someone starts saying things like, what boundaries are you going to put in your business? You're just like, what? Yeah. You know, it's overwhelming immediately. And so for me, what people have got to do, first of all, is claw some energy back so that there's a little bit of space so that their brain can get out of survival mode because they're resting better and turning off a little bit better, and then start thinking properly. And then they can make smart decisions.
And what's a good way to actually kind of like, do less? Because, there's like, it's quite hard, right? Sometimes you have so much going on. You have kids, you have business, you have your family.
I feel like it's stressing you out, the thought of doing less. You're like, what do you mean do less? Productive people don't like doing less, it's really hard. But it means usually I say this to people, you need to put something down. And they're like, oh, and I say, what can you put down for a month? And if I put a timeline on it, they think, oh, well, I could not do this for a month. And so it doesn't matter if it's work or home. It's like, I don't care, but do less somewhere.
Okay.
Because often people are burnt out, not just because of work. They're burnt out because there's a perfect storm going on. Their responsibilities at home are high. Maybe they're doing way more than their fair share in their household. They're taking all the responsibility and doing all the thinking for everybody in the house. This is really common. And then on top of that, they're trying to run a business or run a column. And so when you need to do less, sometimes you have to just stop doing something that you can go, okay, that doesn't matter if I don't do it for a while. But more often than not, you've got to start delegating and asking for help.
And
that's one of the really easy things.
And what are the usual things that, when you think about your clients and, hairdressers, what is the usual thing that, gets pushed away?
I mean, I think things like, I always say this, what doesn't have to be you? I speak to people who are cleaning their own salon owners that are cleaning their own salon. That does not have to be them. Get a cleaner. Get a cleaner at home. If you're earning more than a cleaner, pay a cleaner, because your time could be spent on your business or with your family. It's crackers. Do you know what I mean? I mean, someone said to me when I was 21, share the wealth, Hayley, employ a cleaner. It's the best advice I ever had, give someone else a living. And so, because I think sometimes people feel guilty about having cleaners. And I just think, no, you're employing someone and giving them a livelihood, carry on. So there's permission to get a cleaner. So I think that's one of the really easy things to do. You could even do something like get Gusto or HelloFresh, that kind of thing. And so that you're just taking a little bit of responsibility away. I would be asking your partner to do X, Y, and Z. I would be saying to your kids, I think it's time you started X, Y, and Z. Things like that. Maybe it's time that someone was promoted to manager in your salon and you gave some responsibility away to somebody else. Maybe they don't even have to be a manager, but you could pay someone a little bit more and give them some responsibility. Count the stock, order the coffee, make sure there's toilet roll. Just all these basic things that people are doing. There's things like that. I think you're going to love this one. I think things like getting a booking system are really helpful because
I love this.
It takes away a ton of admin. What I find so many hairdressers and beauty people are doing is spending their evenings ping pong messaging. When do you want to come? Have you got 10? No, can do 11. Can't do 11. Oh, no. And so things like booking systems and stuff like that are really helpful as well.
Yes, I fully agree.
One of our users actually came back to us and said, I've actually saved like 40 hours.
Yeah.
I mean, a week or month. Or
yeah.
I don't remember what it was.
40 minutes a day, 40 hours a month. Yeah. I mean,
For sure. Because I remember being a paper diary hairdresser and I spent a lot of time texting people, and it just was so long-winded and frustrated. I mean, I used to pick the phone up in the end and just be like, when do you want to come? But even that, I could have been doing something different, like lying down, watching the telly, doing Pilates, making my dinner, and so it made me feel like I was on 24/7, and that's not great for your brain either. And so, there's lots of ways. And I think the thing is this: often people are looking for the silver bullet. What's the one thing that's going to change my life? And it's like that no one thing is. And I remember feeling like that. I bought all the things and everything. I believed in everything because I just wanted there to be one answer. But what I really believe is it's lots of good decisions. It's lots of small decisions repeated that really are going to change your life.
Yes, no, I completely agree. It's like, these small things compound. Like, it's so funny you mentioned like the food boxes. We were just talking about this before you came on. Like, I was telling Sam that I'm actually ordering this kind of meal preps from a company called Simmer. So I even like went past the HelloFresh and My Full Chefs.
Oh yeah, cook it for me, folks.
Yeah, because I was like, exactly. I was like, I just don't want to cook. I want it to be delivered.
I don't want to chop veg.
Exactly. I mean, I do it, right? I do it for the evening for my daughter and for my family. But for my lunch, I'm like, I don't have time. So I just get it in. It's like £5, I think, £6. Here you go.
I've done it all. I've done them all, and I think it's great. And, I think obviously for some people, cost will be a problem. And it's cheaper to cook for yourself. It is, and so you've really got to decide what's the biggest struggle for you. Is it time? Is it money? You're like, I'm going to throw some money at this problem. But it's not the case for everyone, but it's certainly an option, it just is. But then the other end of that is batch cooking. And I do that quite a lot. Like, I love to make a chili for 20 and portion it up and get it in the freezer, and future me is so pleased when she opens the freezer and there's something to eat that's decent. And I've even said to hairdressers sometimes, go to Costco, buy a lasagna for £9, cut it into portions and put it in your freezer. It's marginally better than some stuff and not as bad as others, but just, it doesn't have to be perfect. Take action. It doesn't have to be perfect.
I think that's really easy kind of advice for people, hopefully, that are listening, that may feel they're close to that, to analyse where they're at and take that action.
I just think it can be really hard sometimes because you think that the action's not big enough and it won't solve the problem, so you don't bother. And so that's why I think it's really important to understand that it's lots of small things. And, I decided to do some things health-wise a few months ago. And I decided to, and my normal stance would be, I'm going to do them all in one day. I'm going to do it all. I'm going to change my life. And I thought, let's not do that again. And I thought, I'm just going to implement one at a time. And when I've done this and it's a habit, I will do the next one. And I changed a few things about how I exercise and eat one at a time. So it took a few weeks to get that going, but they stuck.
That's great.
As opposed to the usual all or nothing madness that I like to entertain sometimes.
Does your booking system still suck? Then you should look into Jenna.
Hey, I'm Jen, and I'm the founder of Jenna. We created Jenna specifically for solo business owners. We know how hard it is to build your business. Without the right tools, it's even harder. Booking systems suck because they're designed for big salons. They're complicated, they have expensive monthly fees, and loads of hidden fees. And that's why we built Jenna.
With Jenna, you can look professional with a professionally designed website where you need no tech skills.
Jenna also helps you get your evenings back, because on average, beauty pros spend 45 minutes going back and forth with their clients. With Jenna, you can set your boundaries. Our system takes bookings, sets reminders, and handles payments automatically.
And with Jenna, we know how important it is for you to build your own brand with your own website, which is fully customizable. You don't sit next to your competitors on a marketplace, and we make sure that you stand out to your clients.
And the best is that it's only £19 per month. That's it.
No way!
With Jenna, there are no new client fees, no hidden fees, and no unexpected big bills at the end of the month.
This sounds too good to be true, but it's not. So check it out on jenna.so or look for @jenna.ai_ on Instagram.
Check out Jenna on the App Store as well.
And I think that kind of, it leads us on a bit to our next topic, which is you talk a lot about your ADHD.
The all or nothingness.
A lot of people in the industry have got ADHD, and it can be really tricky to kind of own a business, work for yourself, and try to get yourself together and get yourself organized. What kind of tips and things have you found that have helped you and other clients along the way?
Well, it's a big topic that for a tip, but I'm going to try. But it's all, it is funny things like, it's like, and I forgot the question halfway through answering it. I mean, that's ADHD central. I got so engrossed over here, I could hear myself thinking, I don't know what I'm answering anymore, because I just couldn't hold the information in my head. It's why I write things down. When people ask me questions, I think, oh, I'll write that down so I remember it in a minute, because my working memory is not very good, is one of the things I've learned. And so, just as a really silly example, I find things that hairdressers do is like read a message and go, yeah, I'll book that in later. Gone forever. I mean, I had a client turn up one day and I had no idea she was coming. But then I saw her text and I remember saying, yeah, I'll book that in, but I forgot. And so there's things like that. And so, it can sometimes feel a little chaotic as a hairdresser with ADHD. My stance on it is this. This is the overall big answer. When you understand how ADHD works, like actually works in the brain and how it presents itself, and then you can figure out how that is showing up in your life. So know yourself and understand ADHD in a proper way. You can start figuring out how to run your life slightly differently so that you're working with your ADHD instead of fighting against it constantly. And what I realised was I was fighting against mine constantly. There was a period of time where I was truly convinced I had chronic fatigue syndrome. I thought I was poorly. I thought the doctors haven't noticed, I need tests, because I was so exhausted all the time. And now I know that's ADHD, but my understanding was that ADHD is you're bouncing off the walls. And that was not true for me. I was exhausted, And I remember one of my neighbours said to me, you're either really glamorous, Hayley, or you look unwell. And she's like, you're in your pajamas for days. And I just thought, that's how I feel. I'm like, I get this burst of energy, I run it to the end, and then I collapse. And it took me a long time. And then I'd be up again. And then I'd think, oh, let's go for it. And then I collapse. And so I was in this cycle of excited, exhausted, excited and exhausted. And when I started to really understand what's going on and how dopamine is running the show and all of this, I started to manage my energy better. And so I was less excited and then less exhausted. And I have more of an even keel, which prevented me burning out all the time and living in this just cycle of desperation, where I was always trying to catch up because I'd been burnt out for a while. And so I think that, tips is tough because I see a lot of things on social media like want to get more productive as an ADHD. And I just think, oh, it's the tip of the iceberg, folks. There's so much more. And so I find that sort of thing a little bit annoying, when it's just tips about productivity. I find that irritating because there's so many bigger issues at play with ADHD. However, ADHDs are often a bit frustrated with their productivity. So I know why people post stuff like that, because it like lures you in. But I just think there's other things that need to be taken care of so that you can become productive. Buying a timer will not solve all your problems. You've got to solve your energy crisis first.
Yeah. I think recognizing it though is step one, right? Understanding.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah. Even my husband, he's ADHD, and the thought of him sitting at a computer and working like is his worst nightmare. He has to take all his phone calls on the go, walking around. That's just how it works.
I mean, who's not walking around on the phone?
Yeah.
I walk around cleaning my teeth. I saw something the other day that was like ADHDers can't stand in front of a mirror and clean their teeth. And I thought, who's doing that? I walk around the house because it's too boring to stand there. It's just quite funny, really, isn't it? But I think a lot of hairdressers are attracted to hairdressing because it's a good job for ADHD people. It's fast moving. It's not always the same. There's lots of things that give us dopamine as hairdressers. Talking gives you dopamine, and we need dopamine to get the energy going as ADHDers. And so talking, you get to talk for a living, you get to wear what you want pretty much. There's music on, it's fun. People say, thank you, aren't you amazing, every couple of hours. And so there's lots of validation and potential for dopamine hits. And so you can see why we end up in this industry. It's so interesting. But I think what's really interesting is I was diagnosed with depression as a young person, and how I see that now is I had undiagnosed ADHD. I don't think I was depressed. I mean, I was fed up, but I was more angry, to be honest. But what commonly happens, particularly for women, is they're diagnosed with anxiety or depression and not ADHD. We're only really starting to scratch the surface of what we know about ADHD. They didn't even think women could have it until a few years ago. Wow. They thought people grew out of it. They thought it was a little boy problem. And so we know, I mean, I'm excited for in 10 years' time when there'll be so much more known, but I really made an effort to learn as much as I could, and I had access to a lot of courses that are not available to everyone because I used to be a therapist, and so I could go on a lot of stuff that was deeper, and so I learned everything I could from lots of different ways, and tooled myself up. And then I started to realize that so many of my coaching clients, I thought, I think they've got ADHD. I think that's what it might be. And it was so funny when I look back, because I realized I already was writing education for ADHD, because when I wrote Burnout and Boundaries, I didn't know I had ADHD. And now I look at that course now and I think, that's a course of how to get out of ADHD burnout. I mean, it works for all burnout, but I was really always writing for me. I was always writing about what I know. I wrote for me and based on my experience and my clients. And so it just made so much sense when I was diagnosed,
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And for those who are not very familiar with ADHD, like, what does it do to your brain?
Do you mean like how? Yeah, well, I'll answer how I can answer, in my version of events. And so in a really simplified way, people have dopamine receptors in their brains. And also dopamine is dripped into your brain continuously. And for people with ADHD, our receptors don't work that well. And it's not dripped consistently, the dopamine. You get a flood and then you get none. And then you get a little drip and then you get a flood and then you get none. So it's all or nothing. And so
hence the up and down.
Yeah. And so, but when you find out what dopamine is in charge of, you're like, oh, no, I've got no chance. No wonder. It's in charge of motivation, planning, organization. There's more things, it's in mood, your mood. And so, I mean, let's just start there. There's more. I can't remember off the top of my head, but those big things. So it's in charge of how you feel, how you react to things, how well you can organize things, remember things. Well, what if you've got none? And what if you don't know you're supposed to get some? And what if you don't know how to get it? You end up like me, lying on the couch thinking you've got chronic fatigue syndrome.
Yeah, that's super interesting. So how do you kind of navigate this? Because obviously, like, this kind of all or nothing is very hard to function on a daily basis. So
it is, but it's also exciting. And so it's also quite hard to leave behind, I find, for me and for other people. But leave it behind you must. But
Tell
the
me more about this.
Well, because all or nothing, nothing feels terrible, but all feels great. I kind of call it when the magic happens. And when that magic happens, I feel amazing. I could conquer the world. The ideas are coming. I'm productive. I could sit for 7 hours writing a course when the magic comes. Like your husband, I don't want to sit in front of a computer, but I can sit there for 7 hours when I'm in the zone and the magic's happening. But what's difficult is getting that magic going. That's what's hard. But what's also a problem is when the magic comes, we ride it as ADHDers because it feels good, and we ride it longer than we should, and then we collapse. And that's how that all or nothing happens. And so what I've learned is I've got to not ride it. And that can be really hard sometimes because you're like, it feels so good. It can feel like a drug. I don't want to give it up. It feels brilliant. But what I've noticed is if I don't let the highs get too high and I don't push myself, the lows don't come. Okay. But I used to think that was about depression. Like I figured that out a little bit in myself a long time ago. Oh, I've noticed if when I get high, a low always follows it. But I didn't know it was about ADHD. I thought that was about my mood. And it kind of is, but really it's an ADHD energy management thing. And so what what I'm saying here is it can be really tough to give up riding those highs of magic if you don't know how you're going to motivate yourself otherwise. And one way ADHDers motivate themselves, not necessarily consciously, but unconsciously, is crisis. Oh, we love a crisis. Deadlines, And so if something needs doing in 2 weeks' time, I'm not doing that. But if something needs doing by tomorrow, well, I'm going to stay up all night and do it. And my dopamine's going to kick in because panic's going to kick in. And so it's a really easy way to motivate yourself is to have constant crisis. And so we can also start living in this false energy, and then you're borrowing energy from tomorrow because you're constantly in crisis. And so it's effective, but it's a very difficult way to live. And causes lots of problems.
How do you to work around that? So obviously you were saying like maybe don't ride the highs that much, like maybe let it go or like take a rest.
Yeah.
Are there any other things you can do?
That's one of the really big things, I think, actually, because I think there's a few things that are interesting. It's about, if you think about ADHD, I think about it in this way quite a lot. ADHD is an energy management problem. That's how I make sense of it. Other people make sense of it in different ways, but that's a way that spoke to me. And so if you're always thinking about your energy, so number one, don't overspend it, so that you've always got some for tomorrow. Like that's one way of thinking about it. It's like budgeting your money. It's got to last the month. But other things is figure out what exhausts you. So like me and your husband, I'm going to venture here, Sam, we're not big fans of doing things with details, filling in forms, getting new house insurance is a day's work for me. That would take me a whole day's energy. I could coach 8 people a day on the bounce and have energy at the end of that because that gives me energy. If I had to go and renew my house insurance and find a new policy, I couldn't give myself any other jobs that day because I would burn out. If I tried to do that, or on my lunch, I can't even tell you the chaos it would give. And it took me a long time to realise that is not my zone of genius. And it takes me a lot more energy to do, a ridiculous amount of energy to do that than a neurotypical person. And so knowing that's really useful. And you often find in like partnerships, people who fall in love, get married, have houses together. One of them is more good at that stuff and the other one's the fun committee, and I want to be the fun committee. I need someone who's good at house insurance. That's what I'm going to put on my Tinder profile. But people are drawn to each other for the opposite reasons in lots of ways. And so, one thing you can do is have a chat with the people in your house or your significant other about what are you both good at? How could, can I do what you hate doing? And can you do what, and so that you're using your energy more smartly. But it's not the case for everyone. I don't have a partner, so I do have to do the insurance every now and again, which is really miserable. But I'm mindful about when I decide to do that job now. I don't delude myself anymore that I can do that after work in a break. Like I'm going to have a day. I'd have to put a day to one side to do a couple of boring tasks. And then I'd do them in the morning and then I'd be asleep for the rest of the day. Or I'd just zone out and watch TV.
This is so interesting. So what then happens in your brain when you have to go to this task?
Oh, I mean, I hate it. JM. Like, I just think, I might put it off
Okay.
forever, and then end up with no house insurance. And then that, so this is how crisis and chaos happens for ADHD people, because they put off things that are important but boring. Because if you're a neurotypical person, important is enough of a motivator for you to do it, but it's not enough of a motivator for an ADHD person. Important, it will not get you off the couch on your computer to do your taxes. It's not. You're going to need panic, or you're going to have to get really good at motivating yourself. And so, I use things like reward. And so I would reward myself either before or after that task. Big time.
Love that.
What's a good reward?
I mean, it really varies for people. You've got to be really careful on this reward thing, But I sometimes reward myself with TV on a work day. Like an episode or something on a Wednesday afternoon. That's a reward. Like in the evening, it doesn't count because everyone's watching telly. But, like I work from home. And so sometimes I'll be like, if I do these 3 dreary tasks, I can watch an hour of my TV show that I'm into, at 1 o'clock in the middle of the day. That's a treat and a reward.
Yes.
And then sometimes what I will do is the opposite of that. I will allow myself to watch an hour of TV before I start working. So my dopamine starts. I get the reward first because the dopamine will give me enough motivation to do the task. And so I use it in both ways. There's a name for it. It's called the Pomodoro technique, and it's the before or the after. It's the reward comes before or after. So there's things like that, So yeah, you got to reward it's classic how you motivate ADHDers. So people use all sorts of things, but the reward for me would really depend on the size of the task as well. I might reward myself bigger if it was something really big. It depends. But, I'm really thinking about day-to-day dull every day. Like there's parts of my business that I find quite boring, the admin and stuff. And so I need little things to get through that. And I outsource it. I have a VA. And she deals with a lot of my tech dreariness.
Yeah.
So I don't have to do. I delegate things that are not my zone of genius, or things that drain my energy significantly that don't have to be me. Like scheduling emails, I find that really tedious and boring. And so I pay someone to do that because it doesn't have to be me. She's really good at it. And I'm not. Because I'm a bit slapdash because it's boring, and so I'll do it wrong. So things like that. And I think hairdressers can be outsourcing stuff. I think we feel like we can't, but the world has come on a lot. We've talked about booking systems, but I mean, I know people with virtual receptionists. Wow. Because people want to phone up to make an appointment. And I think, okay, there's a lot of stuff, and bookkeepers, accountants, you don't have to be doing your bookkeeping yourself, gang. There's all sorts of things that we can do. Cleaners. There's lots.
And you can't do it all. I think that's especially for freelancers or home salons or people kind of working on their own, they have a huge responsibility of I've got to do everything, and you can't, and it's
no, you absolutely can't, and you can't grow a business on your own. I think it can be really difficult to sustain a successful business on your own. But I think a lot of us in our industry start out doing everything ourselves. And then there's a guilt that comes for people where they can't. And so instantly what I find, people think there's something wrong with me. And I'm like, no, there's nothing wrong with it. That's 3 people's jobs. It's time to let go of a little bit of responsibility and give it to somebody else. And then the resistance there comes, I find, when I'm coaching people, is the lack of control. They don't like losing control and stuff like that. And what if they don't do it as well as me? And so, when you're, people, you say to me, I'm a bit of a control freak. I don't love that saying, but people say it a lot. I'm a bit of a control freak. And I just think it's harder for people who identify in that way to delegate. Because then they'll micromanage. And then that's even worse. Yeah. Like having to check someone else has done it is harder than doing it yourself. And so the cycle carries on.
Absolutely. And I mean, you touched on this a bit before, but where the kind of awareness of mental health will be in 10 years' time. Currently, where we're at, do you think the industry is in a good place? Do you think it needs more work? What do you feel the current state of like mental health awareness is in the hairdressing
I
industry?
think we're in a transition phase. I don't think we're totally rubbish, and I don't think we're amazing. But I feel that we're in the middle of a cultural shift in our industry. That's where I think we are. And so I think to greater and lesser degrees, the awareness is there. And like I say, to greater and lesser degrees, you know, I know salons who are amazing, with amazing salon owners who are really focused on this stuff. You know, they're bringing me to their salon to do workshops. They're really thinking about people's work-life balance. They want to do things a little bit differently. And, you know, they think when they bring a change into the business, they're thinking about how it will affect the team. Like, that is a fact. You know, they're like, think about it in a big 360 way. And then I think there are people who are like, this is a bit fluffy and silly. Why don't everyone just get on with it? You know, there's that sort of mentality that does still exist a little bit, but I really feel the tide is turning against that. So I do think the awareness is much better. I think the interest is there. I think we've got a way to go, but I'm really hopeful because the changes I've seen in the last few years are massive. You know, I'm part of a global campaign that L'Oreal put together. They asked me to help with a campaign that they're doing called, well, it's not doing, it's happening, it's out. It's called Head Up, and it's free mental health education globally available for all hairdressers. So whether you buy L'Oreal or not, you can access this education. And you know, when they asked me to be part of that project, A, I was thrilled that I was asked, but B, I was thrilled because I thought, when someone like L'Oreal cares about that, people listen, and it makes some other people think, well, I better care about that as well, you know? And so I think that is a real shove forward, that you've got a big brand recognizing this is a problem in our industry and we could help. We have the means to help and get this message out there. And so I thought that was brilliant. But what's interesting is how that came about was it was about 3 years ago. L'Oreal did this survey of loads of hairdressers and said, what's your number one problem right now? And someone said to me, they thought money and business worries was what the answer was going to be. And when it came back mental health, they were shocked. And when they were like, we need to do something about this. And so that's how that came. You know, it was a shock that 65% of hairdressers said they were struggling with their mental health. Wow. And that is, it's about 3 times the national average in the UK. 20% is the national average, and we're at 65. Wow. And so within our industry, this is a big, you know, specifically in our industry, this is a problem disproportionately.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes total sense. And I think, like, when I think about mental health, like, I usually also think very closely with boundaries. I think it's often linked, one to the other. And I think you say something, like, there's a quote that I hope you don't mind me saying. It's like, you teach people how to treat you by what you tolerate and allow. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I didn't make it up. I don't know where I heard it. You know, it's not mine specifically, but it's quite a famous saying. Who knows who said it? It's definitely connected to boundaries. I think there's lots of hairdressers who come and tell me their story about why they're stressed and all of that stuff. And then when we start to look at their policies and their boundaries and how they run their business, it becomes clear that the reason their clientele is saying, can you do my hair at 7 on Sunday, is because, well, they don't know what the rules are. And I said, if people don't know what the rules are, they have to keep asking questions to find out what the rules are. And so if you're getting a lot of questions that you consider cheeky from your clients, I would take that as a sign that they don't know the rules. Your boundaries are not clear enough. Your policies are not clear enough. And so that's a really good place to start. But when you constantly allow someone to be late, don't be surprised when they keep turning up late because they think that's okay. When you allow it, people presume that's okay for you. Unless you say, on this occasion, I will allow it, then they know it's on this occasion. But often we don't do that as hairdressers. We do go, don't worry, Sandra, just sit down, and then we're moaning in the back or whatever. But we allow it. And so Sandra thinks, Hayley won't mind if I'm 10 minutes late. She never minds. And it carries on. But if the one time you say, I can't do you today now, or we're going to need to do a smaller job, Sandra will be on time next time. And you can do all of this in a kind way. You don't have to be mean. You don't have to be rude. You can do all of this in a really kind way. But I think you need to tell people how you like to do business.
Yes, no, I think this is a really good point. Like, I remember like my coach was telling me about this because I was talking about, management and how, I manage my team. And she was like, well, when something happens that you don't like, there has to be a consequence. And I was like, oh, what do you mean consequence? I always think like punishment when I think consequence. But she was like, no, a consequence can just be having a chat, just saying what you think, because that's a consequence. That's exactly what you're saying. Like that person is late. You just say, look, you're late 20 minutes, like I'll allow it this time, but next time I won't be able to take you. And then when next time happens, then you do it. And that's a consequence.
There was fair warning and things like that, But what I find hairdressers do sometimes is make that person's appointment bigger because they know they're always late, which is the opposite,
Exactly, never do that.
Yeah, and I think sometimes, with consequences, like you say, sometimes people just have to be allowed to fail. And feel the consequences, in the nicest way possible.
I've really learned this with like education. Like I have a daughter, and sometimes she's just faffing around, in the evening, and I'm like, look, if you're faffing around, like you won't have a story, and she just does it, and I'm like, well, no story, and then the next day she's like very quick because she knows
exactly that. It's really as simple as that, there's a consequence to everything, for better or worse, and I think when we're constantly trying to manage other people's consequences, it's exhausting.
Completely.
Whether that be at home, like you say, with your kids or your clients, it's too much responsibility to look after the world like that.
Yeah, completely. And that's why sometimes you just need a booking system that will just put the boundaries for you.
Do I say that quite a lot though, like, a booking system's a bit like having a bouncer, completely. Or a receptionist, a bodyguard. But it's like the buffer between you and a difficult conversation. And I think that's can be really good.
Someone else
you're struggling.
Someone else that we spoke to said you can just blame the booking system. It just doesn't allow that. So
computer says no.
Use Jenna as an excuse that's it doesn't allow me to do that, so I can't do it.
Yeah. I even suggested to some of our clients, sometimes they have this kind of difficult policy that we implement, like just say that we just don't do it. I've been thinking
there's always things, I know people who have fake assistants or or whatever, and it's just like that person sends the email and says, sorry, we don't do that. And there's all sorts of things that people do, isn't there, just to try and sort of be kind to soften the blow, avoid the awkwardness and stuff. But I think there's a lot of tools in hairdressing these days that weren't available when I was younger to just make our lives easier, But I think the thing is that certainly for a certain generation that would be my generation, the Gen Xers, like what you've got to think about is, I'm 49 now. Computers was not a thing when I was young. We didn't have computers in my schools until I was in high school, and it was an option. Like, I didn't use computers. And then I went to hairdressing college. I didn't go to do A-levels. And so I didn't work on a computer. And then I got really good at doing highlights for 30 years. And so I couldn't even copy and paste until a few years ago. Like, I had no basic computer skills. And so I think some of the resistance is I've got to learn something new. And it's so hard, for people, and they think it's just easier on pen and paper and all of that stuff. And I've been there, and I really understand that resistance, but what I'm always saying to people is short term, there will be some discomfort. Long term, there will be so much freedom. But it's tough. it's tough. You've got to drag those paper diaries out of people's screaming hands, haven't you? Do you know what I mean? That's what I was like. But so I feel like sometimes the tech can feel overwhelming for hairdressers because, particularly in a certain age bracket, we didn't learn the basics at school, and so it's a completely new skill set, which is tough.
No, I completely get that. And that's why, like, I mean, at least what we do is we try to keep it as simple as possible. Like, we've designed it actually with ADHD in mind exactly for this reason,
excellent.
like with one information per screen. And I think like that's really helpful.
All of that stuff, and just have people who can help you set it up and stuff like that, make it easy, like outsource that business,
Amazing.
Get someone else to do it for you.
Thank you so much for your time. This was really amazing. So people can find you on Instagram at the Resilient Hairdresser. Is that right?
Yeah, that's where I live. I live mainly on Instagram.
Exactly. And I think the first step, if you want to take care of your mental health, is to go on Instagram and go and follow Hayley directly. That's like probably the best, first step to do. And then afterwards, like there are courses, there is support, there's a lot of things that you can provide to help them kind of cope. First of all, learn about mental health and how it impacts their day-to-day work. Then also have the tools to work around it.
Yeah, if people want to DM me with questions about anything specific they want to help with, I'm very good in my DMs on Instagram, not so much on Facebook.
But so Instagram it is.
If people message me on Instagram, I reply.
At the Resilient Hairdresser. Hayley, thank you so much for your time.
It's a pleasure.
It was a fascinating discussion. Thank you so much for sharing your story.
I love getting asked questions.
Thanks,
I mean, I think it will resonate with the audience, and it definitely resonated with me and Sam as well.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.